so that's kind of how I want to work this. I'm grateful to be running for the United States Congress. It's not something I've ever intended on doing, ever. It was never in the life plan. In fact, I'll tell you how we kind of came to this, but for the last 5 years I've served in the legislature. I've been in the Utah House of Representatives, and I just recently resigned and focused on running for Congress. And boy, I've been successful in the legislature. We've had a lot of success in pushing forward constitutionally conservative issues and the agenda. But if you go back, I want to take you back a little bit further so you can kind of understand where I come from. Because if you go back 6 or 7 years, 6 years ago, I would not have been caught dead in a meeting like this. I was very apolitical. I voted every November, and I was conservative. I had basic conservative principles, but I was not involved, and never really. The bottom line is I was working as a police officer. I'd been a SWAT team commander. I'd been a canine officer, a sex crimes detective. Those are the things that I did, and I was working overtime, doing everything I could to make ends meet. Yes, I was a canine officer. You heard that.
Was that up in Cache Valley?
No, so I worked the majority of my law enforcement career with South Jordan City.
Oh, okay.
I was their first canine officer, and I was actually their first SWAT team commander too. I was the founder of the South Valley SWAT team. Me and a couple other people created the South Valley SWAT team in Salt Lake County, and I was a SWAT team commander there for many years, and that was a good time. Dangerous, but it was an enjoyable period of time. And then I went to West Valley City. So it was interesting. I grew up in West Valley City, and I worked for South Jordan. Oh. Then I moved south into Harriman, and went and worked for West Valley. So I've been all over the valley, and this is home. It's where I grew up. But I was doing everything I could, working to make ends meet and put food on the table for our family. I worked a lot of overtime just so that my wife could stay home with our young kids. That was important to me, no problem. And but I was never involved politically. But there was a series of events that came together that led me into politics. One thing that bothered me, but I never knew how to change it, was we had some of the weakest laws in the country when it came to child predators. We would put somebody, I would arrest somebody, we'd put them in prison and for a brutal child sex offense, and they'd be out 3 years later, and they'd do it again. And that just drove me crazy as a detective, as a police officer, it drove me nuts. But I never really knew what to do about it. Well, one day I got a postcard in the mail. It was a postcard from a parental rights organization, and parental rights are very important to me. I believe that you as parents should have the right to raise your children how you see fit. I believe that the government should stay out of the way and defer to parents. They're your children, it's your family. I believe in that. But it's one of those postcards that you get, you just look at it and throw it away. Well, I did something that would change my life forever. I called the number on the postcard, and I asked the lady that answered. I said, "Do you guys have a yard sign I could put in my yard?" I wanted to help them in some way. And they said, "No." She said, "No, we don't have a yard sign, but you can help us in other ways." I said, "Okay, how? How can I help you?" And she said, "You can go to your caucus meeting, and you can run as a delegate." Well, I have to tell you, this was 6 years ago. Yeah, I was 30 years old. It's the first time in my adult life I'd ever heard those two words, at least that I paid attention. I had no idea what a caucus meeting was, and I had no idea what a delegate was. And I said, "Well, what is that?" And here's the thing, you gotta understand. You guys understand the process. You understand what the delegates are and what a caucus meeting is. But most people don't. Understand, I was normal at once. Okay? Unfortunately, not enough people know, and we need to get them engaged and get them to the caucus meetings and get them involved. Well, after she explained to me what it was a group of neighbors, your neighbors meeting at home, and they elect delegates to go and vote for who they want to be the Republican on the ballot in November. I said, "I could do that, absolutely." And she said, "Well, where do you live?" I said, "Well, I live in Harriman." And she perks up real big, and she's like, "Really?" She's like, "Well, have you ever thought of running for the legislature?" And I said, "Lady, you just explained to me what a delegate was. No, I've never thought of running for the legislature." And she said, "Well, would you?" I said, "No." I mean, I I wanted a yard sign, okay, you know? And she said, well, will you at least meet with me? And, said, all right, I'll meet with you. I thought I'd, entertain her or whatever. And, she said, okay, so we set up a meeting. I hang up the phone, and I turned to my wife, Sherry, and I said, Sherry, I think she wants me to run for the legislature. And Sherry says, well, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. And about 2 weeks later, I met with this lady. Hey there, you're upset, aren't you? You want to talk to her?
Crybaby.
All right. Be
Yeah.
nice. We're good. I talk over dogs, I talk over babies, I talk over people who don't like me. I can do it all. No big deal at all. So, 2 weeks later, I met with this lady. We had breakfast at IHOP in West Valley. And I'm telling you, she was a saleswoman. Wow. She said, I've been researching you. And I said, researching, whatever. And it was the funny thing is, the only thing that you could find on me on the internet was that I was a police officer. And at the time, I was a competitive powerlifter. I did a lot of powerlifting. I competed in bench press competitions, and I had since 1999. And I had won a couple world titles in the bench press, and so she had seen that. And she said, you're the perfect candidate. And I said, lady, you're desperate. I don't know. You're desperate to find. She explained to me that my legislator, my representative, was the most liberal Republican in the state. That he continually voted for tax increases, continually voted for bigger government, voted against their issues, and they wanted him out.
Yeah.
And they said, you're the perfect candidate. I said, yeah, you're just looking for someone to run. Well, I told her, okay, I'll put my name on the ballot. I'll go down and I'll file to run, but that's it. I'm not really running, okay? I'm not that interested in it. And she said, fine. So the day came and I went down to Salt Lake County Clerk's office and I paid my $15.80 to put my name on the ballot. That's all it cost. Isn't that about what it cost when you ran in the special election, about $15, $16?
I didn't even have to pay anything else.
Really?
Well, maybe I did. I can't remember.
Filing fee?
Just a
Filing fee.
Yeah.
So I went down there, I paid it, and they said, okay, you're a candidate. I'm like, wow, that's all it takes to become a candidate. And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of cool, run for office. And I went home, and to be honest with you, I forgot about it. Because I had never planned on running for office. I had no money. I had no political experience. I never knew another elected official in my entire life. I was just a blue-collar, middle-class working guy. And but the phone started ringing, and people would call me and they'd say, "Who are you?" I'd say, "Well, I'm just a cop from Harriman." They said, "Well, why are you running?" I said, "I'm not really running." They said, "Well, what's your platform?" I don't have a platform. I'm not really running. And they said, "Well, what do you believe?" And I said, "Well, that I can tell you." And I remember this day what I told people. And I'd say, I believe in the goodness of America. I believe that this is the greatest country that has ever existed on the face of the earth. I believe that any one of us can succeed if government will just get out of the way, stop overtaxing and stop overregulating every aspect of our life. I believe that the founding fathers were divinely inspired men, and that the Constitution is a divinely inspired document, and that the founding fathers were chosen and raised up at that time to help create and draft the Constitution and create this country. I said, I believe in the Bill of Rights, and I'm unapologetically pro-life. I'm a staunch supporter of the rights of self-defense and the Second Amendment and right to bear arms, and I believe that the government's just gotten too big. And people said, we want to help you. So for the next 2 weeks, my wife and I really had to spend a lot of time on our knees and thinking and praying and deciding whether we were actually going to do this. And we decided, yeah, we're going to run. And I didn't know anything about running for office, but the one thing I did have was this. I grew up in a military family. My father served in the 82nd Airborne Division. My parents had 5 boys. Of the 5 boys, 3 of my brothers are career military. The other 2 of us are career law enforcement. And so my parents instilled in us from a very young age a deep sense and a deep love for God, family, and country. And they also instilled in us a deep work ethic. And so I just went to work. I called people on the phone. I met with people in houses 1-on-1, 4-on-1, 5-on-1, whatever. I met with people. I brought my message to them. And in November of 2006, I was elected.
Wow.
And I got to tell you, it was stunning. because it was the second most overwhelming feeling I've ever had. The most overwhelming, most humbling feeling of inadequacy I'd ever had is the day that the nurse hands you your first baby and says, okay, go home.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting there like, okay, does the nurse come with us? You know, I mean, I don't know how to raise one of these things. You know the feeling of inadequacy, it's stunning. Well, being elected to the House of Representatives was close, because I went from being a flatfoot, just a patrolman on the street, to now representing 70,000 people. And I had no idea how to be representative. But I put myself to work, and I was humble enough that I listened and I learned. And I've been involved in some of the most significant pieces of legislation that we've seen in the last very, very long while in this state. I want to highlight just a few of them, then talk to you why I'm running for Congress. I told you sex offenders, it was one of the reasons one of the things that really motivated me to get involved. My first term in office, I passed the Jessica Lunsford Act, called Jessica's Law. And it moved Utah from having the weakest laws in the country when it came to child predators to having the strongest laws in the country. In fact, before I was elected, the worst penalty that a child rapist could get was 3 years in prison. They could extend it. It could be 3 years, or more. But they could be out in 3 years. And so many of them were. We increased the penalties to a minimum mandatory 25 years to life in prison on a first offense, and life with no parole on a second offense. We also made child killers eligible for the death penalty in that law. And so it was a great thing. It was something I wanted to accomplish. But moving forward, there were many fights to be had, because the federal government was coming down, violating the Constitution at every turn. They were trampling on state sovereignty. They were costing us a ton of money, driving us further into debt and deficits. The state was moving in the same direction in some respects. So there's a couple bills that I want to highlight. I was the first legislator in the country to pass a constitutional amendment securing and guaranteeing your right to a secret ballot. And I think, well, why is that important? Here's what was going on. President Obama, when he was elected, he promised the big labor unions that he was going to pass a law called card check. Card check would have allowed the labor unions to come in, and with your company, they could come in and sign petitions, get petitions from the employees, and all they had to do is get a signature. And if they got 50% of your employees to sign a card, you're now unionized. You're a unionized company. You get no arguing back, no debate, no vote. Well, the workers were terrified, because they said they can put whatever intimidation techniques or tactics they want on us, and we'll sign that thing, but we really don't want to be union. We want to have a private secret vote, and the right to a secret ballot is something that is sacred to us. So I passed a constitutional amendment, and you ratified it in November 2010. There's so many things you voted for, you probably don't remember, but you did. You ratified it.
Yeah.
And we became the first state in the nation to do that. 11 states followed. And as soon as 11 states continued on, they started passing the same legislation. Card check died in Washington, D.C. It's not even talked about really anymore. And so that was a huge success for us. It was a really tough bill, very significant, and it created a national movement. I was the founder of the Patrick Henry Caucus. The Patrick Henry Caucus is a national organization that was founded right in my home in Harriman with just a few of our friends in the legislature. And